Aloha and welcome to a Hanakako on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcasting Network. I'm Joe Kent, Vice President of Research at the Grassroot Institute, filling in for Dr. Kaylee Iakina, President of the Grassroot Institute. At Grassroot, we love to say a Hanakako, which means let's work together. And today, we're going to work together to learn about a word that's been trending on Google, Twitter, Facebook. That word is libertarian. And today, we're here with Matt Bowler, who describes himself as a libertarian. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So a lot of people are searching right now, what is a libertarian? So let's get that started. What is a libertarian?
Well, to me, the question is a lot to do with politics. And originally, I joined the Republican Party thinking I was going to make a difference, and found out the hard way that there are a lot of talk, and they don't always follow exactly what they're saying they were going to do. So instead of starting with what is a libertarian, what is a Republican, and what is a Democrat? Those are really hard questions for me to figure out. It took me a few years to.
Okay, so you're asking about asking like about a political philosophy in a way. You're saying that would be just as hard as saying what is a Republican or what is a Democrat. So,
right.
And how do you define libertarianism with respect to those two political ideologies?
So if the left and the right are both trying to get more government and more intrusion in our lives, the Libertarian Party is none of the above. It's less government, and I think now is a really good time for that because of the the left and the right choices we're given with Clinton and Trump, and I couldn't imagine voting for either one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And,
a lot of people across the nation are saying, who are these political candidates that we're giving for president, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump? And I see a lot of folks out there saying, we don't want either of them. Now, I should just note the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii is a nonpartisan research organization. But we do look at politics. Obviously, it's a part of our daily lives, and we want to absolutely talk about the implications that it will have on policy in Hawaii and nationally. But when it comes to these two political candidates, I mean, you cannot find a more divisive pair than Clinton and Trump. And a lot of people are saying, well, isn't there any other options? So are there any other options?
So I guess Gary Johnson just won the Libertarian nomination. I think anybody on the Libertarian ticket would be an improvement, just because of they actually stand for something. And so you asked the question, what is a Libertarian? And I would say they have at least some principle about government.
And that principle is?
The non-aggression principle.
Okay.
So basically, do no harm, don't start fights, and maximize freedom and prosperity.
So you're saying that libertarians, whether political or non-political, think about almost a philosophy or a principle that they use as a ruling stick to judge all policies by. And that principle, you call it the non-aggression principle, meaning what?
Yeah, just like I said, don't start fights. Don't aggress
fights, right.
on somebody. Don't be the aggressor or the initiator of force or violence.
Okay, and well, this sounds good, but it sounds really nice and simple. But sometimes life isn't so simple. So what about people in Hawaii who might say, critics who might say, well, what about all these billionaires who start violence against us? Maybe they're running the world. They're starting all these wars, perhaps, and we need to raise taxes to take their money, take the money from the 1% and give it to the 99%. What about that?
Well, I'd say redistribution has been tried, taxes has been tried. There's many examples throughout history that have showed that it leads to failure. I think we've had a war on poverty for the last 50 years or so or more, and we still have poverty. So I would say that we should be looking towards examples that actually work. And there's a movie that just came out. It's called Brexit. The movie is called. It's about Britain leaving the European Union, and they did a fantastic job of showing how after World War II, Germany was let loose to do no regulations at all, just let loose to expand and prosper, and at the same time, Great Britain was not, and they suffered greatly because their economy couldn't get going because of all the regulation, and so they eventually made changes. So we have examples, we know what to do, and we should
So there are examples around the world where a country adopted free market policies and another country maybe adopted big government policies, and the free market examples led to more prosperity. Is that what you're saying? Mm-hmm. Okay, and but still, what about this question about billionaires? I mean, sure, we have levels of a free market, and maybe we should just talk about a ruling stick. So let's imagine a scale from 0 to 10. 10 being maximum government, total control. Maybe you might think of North Korea, for example. And 0 being complete anarchy, just no government at all. So on this scale from 0 to 10, where do libertarians lie?
I think that's up to each individual where they lie, and that's one of the purposes of having the Libertarian Party, is so that they can work out the fine details of that. And of course, I'm actually closer to the 0 range of that. I would like to see it tried where everything is privatized, sell everything, including schools, healthcare, make it all privatized, and that way we'll get the lowest costs and the best service out of them.
Okay, but what about the people who say, I mean, really, Matt, privatized, we're talking about big corporations and big companies, and now we're going to make schools and parks and all these different government services run by private companies that may turn into private monopolies. I mean, what about just greed and corruption getting into this mix?
Sure, I like when people say monopoly, because the only way a monopoly happens is when the government gets involved. And we have a lot of examples just in the US about monopolies. And there's a lot of examples of things that counter those monopolies, like FedEx, countering the post office. And I think it'd be great if FedEx could operate at the same level as the post office.
Okay,
and deliver stuff directly to your mailbox.
So you're talking about if you really want to look at monopolies, there's a big monopoly called the government that has basically a monopoly on all these different government services.
Right.
But what about just monopolies that don't have anything to do with the government? The big drug companies or the big media conglomerates. I mean, aren't there natural monopolies that emerge?
I wouldn't call them pure monopolies, though. If they're successful and they can kind of guard their own territory and provide a service that's valuable, then that's fair. I don't see anything wrong with that.
Okay, but what about this question about if we start privatizing all these different areas of government, hospitals and police and fire? Well, now we're going to have a Walmart school and a J.C. Penney's fire department, and it just seems greedy. It just seems I don't know.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I've seen an example of corporations starting up schools like you're saying.
All right.
But if they wanted to, most likely what would happen is children would be sponsored and get the money directly, and they'd be able to pick which school they want to go to. And I think if we had maybe a voucher system, so that's pushing me up on to 1 on that government level.
Right, this government scale, 0 to 10.
So a voucher system would be much better than a public school system.
Voucher system, what is that? Can you explain, what does a voucher system mean?
It means the taxes that were collected would just be distributed to the parents to pick a school for the child.
Okay, so right now, the way it works is we collect taxes, and those taxes are paid to schools and teachers to allow students to go to school for quote unquote free. But a voucher system, how is that different than the voucher system?
Well, choice, freedom of choice.
So then the money is what, given to the student?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay.
Or the parents. I don't know.
Right, so they're
exactly
given to
that
the
would happen.
parents or the families, and then the parents can choose a public school, or?
Well, if all schools were privatized like I want, then every school would be open to get those students, and schools would then compete to get that money from the voucher system.
Sure.
And
Okay.
Competition for children would be a huge advantage to any economy.
Okay. And that kind of knocks out this question about, well, what about families of those who are less fortunate? Maybe there's a family that doesn't have a lot of money to send their kid to a private school. Well, this also would be a benefit to those families as well.
Right. And as far as I know, I think there's a lot of wasteful spending in Hawaii's schools. There's huge overhead costs that don't make it to the children, and I think Hawaii is due for a change.
Okay. Well, I think right now the upper limit of the spending right now in Hawaii schools is about 11,000, more than 11,000 per student that we're paying, and I think the average private school tuition is 10,000 per student. So if you kind of say, do some back of the envelope math, you can see, well, maybe it is a good idea. But I can still see, even though I can subscribe to this with my feelings, I can still think of a lot of critics who would say, well, it just seems greedy. I mean, what about greed? What about all these corporations making oodles and oodles of money? Isn't there some sort of check that needs to be had to take all this money from the rich and give it to the poor? It's kind of like Robin Hood.
Could be, but there's a lot of corruption involved in that too, and a lot of the money gets misappropriated. So I would say if there's a system where the competition is allowed, then you get to know which ones are better and which ones are worse. Right now, you're kind of locked into a system of, well, this is the school in that area, so that's where they go. And if it doesn't matter, even if the teachers are not good, you can't get rid of them. And so a private system would, solve that problem.
So you're saying even though there's an imbalance in this sort of free system, there is no system that makes everything perfectly balanced.
Right.
And if there is, then there can be corruption there as well. But we're going to learn more about all these different criticisms of libertarianism and see if we can knock them out of the park. This is a libertarian home run derby today on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcasting Network. I'm Joe Kent. Don't go away.
Aloha, everybody. My name is Mark Shklov, and I am the host of a program called Law Across the Sea. And the goal of our program is to show people in Hawaii a little bit about international law and how it touches our shores, especially with guests who have gone beyond the reef and practiced or done international law in other countries and brought it back to Hawaii, and to show its significance to our people and our economy. So I hope you'll join me Mondays, 11 a.m., every other Monday, 11 a.m. on Think Tech Hawaii. Thank you very much.
We're back, and you're watching a Hanakako on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcasting Network. I'm Joe Kent, filling in for Dr. Kaylee Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. And today we're talking about liberty, but we're also talking about how much liberty is appropriate. We're here with Matt Bowler, who describes himself as a libertarian. So now, how much liberty is appropriate? This is a good sort of a question that's being asked nationally, as a lot of people are seeing there's a lot of big government policies and small government policies, and which do we want, especially when it comes to something like gun control. We've seen gun violence across the country, and sometimes it feels like it's ramping up, don't we need the government to protect us from people who have guns?
So from the perspective of a constitutionalist, which I kind of started as, the Second Amendment was about a check on government. So don't really want to disarm the public because of what has happened in other countries. And that's like worst case scenario type thinking, but being able to defend yourself, it should be a right that cannot be taken away.
But you're saying the gun, or the Second Amendment in the U.S. Constitution was created because the people needed the power to defend themselves against a tyrannical government.
Right.
So that's sort of the point. And you're saying, well, is that even a possibility now? And is that even relevant now? I mean, it's hard to even imagine a government being so tyrannical that it would require people to defend themselves. I mean, can you imagine America's government getting so big that we would actually have to fight them off? I mean, it just almost seems, I don't know, just too hard to imagine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people thought that the Abu Ghraib situation was too hard to imagine, that U.S. troops wouldn't do things like that. And people are flawed, and scientifically we know what people will do. There was a experiment with what people will do if an authority figure gives them an order, and it has happened in the past, so that's why that check is there. Doesn't matter if you think it's going to happen. It's just an extra security.
Oh, okay. So even if it's hard to imagine,
right.
Just because something is hard to imagine doesn't mean it can't happen.
Right. The same thing why you buy insurance. You don't expect to get hit by a car, but it happens.
Mm-hmm. But okay, so now we've got this protection, this constitutional protection against a tyrannical government. So we all get to have guns, but there's problems with that too. I mean, so we all get to have guns. That means everybody now gets to have a firearm, and that can be dangerous, especially depending on who gets these firearms. So doesn't the government need to protect us from ourselves when it comes to ammo and guns?
Like I said, it's to me, it's a rights issue. Like if you have a right to defend yourself, and somebody else might have a gun, and they're going to have a gun whether or not the government says they can have one. Guns exist, so we can't just put that in the box and forget about it. So I think there's situations in countries that, even places that don't allow guns, that have a lot more gun violence because they know they're not going to get hurt by a gun, or they can do more damage in an area where there is no guns.
So just because there's a law doesn't mean that it gets rid of gun violence.
Right.
Okay, well, let's take that dangerous situation and ramp it up. We're going to go even more dangerous to warfare. I mean, doesn't the government need to, build the military to protect our country from foreign invaders? Or would libertarians just say, so no, just laissez-faire, just there should be no military or whatever? What do libertarians say when it comes to warfare?
Good question. I've only been in the Libertarian Party for a little while, so I haven't gotten
what do you say?
That involved in foreign policy. But I would say, like, looking at the other two parties, that they're very interventionist and cause more problems than they solve. So
you're saying that for when it comes to warfare, there's another side to the coin as well. Ramping up a lot of military and spending overseas, and intervention in different countries, almost kind of like a Trumpian, or I don't know if Clinton wants to do that. That has consequences as well.
Yeah, and I think Clinton has had her chance when she was Secretary of State. So there's some information about maybe she had a lot to do with the rise of ISIS. There was sending guns over there. So someone who says they're anti-guns, they're selling a lot of weapons overseas. So that's not a good situation. And now we're back in Iraq again and Syria, and so it's a never-ending situation that we have to pay for, and I think it makes matters worse for us inside the U.S.
Okay, so it's a complicated situation.
Yeah.
But there's no one has clean hands maybe on either side of this question right now, at least as far as we can see right now. But let's say we go even more dangerous. So how about drugs? I mean, well, let's start with marijuana. I mean, when people think about libertarians, they often think, oh, those are those guys that smoke pot. But is that how you see libertarians? And what is the libertarian view on drugs?
From my own experience, I think that most people in the Libertarian Party have a high value of ownership of their body. So whatever you want to put in your body is your own business. I think that the FDA has done a lot more damage to people's health than they realize. For example, whenever they put something like the word healthy on a cereal box, they're able to do that because it doesn't have any fat or saturated fat in it. But they're loaded with sugar, and the nutrients that they put in them aren't easily absorbable either. So you're not getting a lot of nutrient value out of that. So something like an avocado would not be able to be, you couldn't write healthy on it because it had lots of fat in it. But you can write healthy on a box of Lucky Charms. It's really dangerous. I mean,
right, for the government to have control over our food supply and say what is healthy and what is not, because really at the end of the day, all food is has some sort of effect on your body, which you might say all food is a drug in a way. And for the FDA to regulate that, that has consequences too.
Yeah. Well, I'd say all food is a chemical, but as far as drugs go, if someone has a perceived benefit towards taking that drug, they should be allowed to do so without being threatened to be put in a cage or something.
Okay, you said perceived benefit, but by whose perception? By the individuals or by someone else's? I mean, somebody might take something like marijuana, and other people say, well, that's bad for you. So shouldn't the government have a say over what is good for us and what is bad for us? Because at the end of the day, individuals might make the wrong choice.
Yeah. Well, the problem is when the government gets involved and they say what's good or bad for you, if they make a mistake, what if they're wrong about marijuana? What if they're wrong about the food we eat? What if they're wrong about, and this happens all the time, the drugs that they allow to be prescribed end up killing people? So when they're wrong, and especially in the case of sugar, they cause a lot of problems.
Okay, well, you're talking about sugar, and it sounds kind of like you have a idea about the foods that we eat. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Why did the FDA get involved with thinking that sugar was a good thing? Well, breads and all that, and just talk a little bit about your ideas about that.
I don't know why they went the route they did. I can't tell you if anybody was paid off, but from all my personal research, sugar is probably the biggest epidemic of health issues in the country. So if we could get people on healthy fats and off of sugar, that we'd have a lot less of the heart disease and actually diabetes and just many problems that are related to that.
That's interesting. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, my mom was a cafeteria, like she worked in the cafeteria at the school, and we would see this pyramid all the time, the pyramid, the food pyramid, where you'd see all the breads that take up the most amount of what you're supposed to get, and the meats take up, a very small amount of what you're supposed to get, and of course, salt and sugar was all peppered throughout that. So do you think that had an influence on the way that the nation eats today?
Yeah, definitely, and they're finally coming around to changing that. But like I said, they were wrong for 30 plus years. They've done a lot of damage. So they should have never been in a position to tell people what's good for them or not.
It's kind of like whenever we ask, should the government do this or that, there's also almost an assumption behind that the government knows what's best for us. And as long as we see these examples, especially with food, we're talking about drugs right now, then we have to ask, does the government deserve that assumption that they're really better for, maybe they're angelic or something like that?
Right, definitely not. They don't deserve any more chances as far as I'm concerned. We should take examples from other countries that have good health and don't eat so much sugar and have longer lifespans. So it's good that we have the ability to expand our knowledge, especially because of the internet, and find out what's good for us, and we don't need the government to tell us anymore.
Well, speaking of what's good for us, what about healthcare? Across the nation, a lot of people would like to have more health care, except, of course, in America, it's so expensive. We see costs rising. Now, with Obamacare, that was supposed to fix things. I'm not sure if it did. It might have made it worse. But in other countries, they have free health care. Well, shouldn't health care be free? Shouldn't it be a right that everyone deserves?
Well, I would say healthcare is a service, not a right. Same thing as like a gun isn't a right. You don't have a right to have to have somebody else's gun, but you have a right to buy a gun. You have a right to buy healthcare. So healthcare as a service, yeah, everybody should have the right to access healthcare. And I believe our healthcare system was started under a free market system, and a lot of it was started with charity. And so we didn't have to have a government create a health care system. What the government did is try to take over.
Mm-hmm.
And so you brought up Obamacare, and one of the interesting things about that is that the actual package that was passed was written largely by some of these bigger corporations. And so I can't imagine that these big corporations would write something that's not in their favor. So
Yeah.
then we get talking about that monopoly word again. So we have a lot of healthcare companies that are actually going out of business. They're shutting doors, and because they can't compete the way they could in the free market. And so now we're left with fewer choices, and the only way that these other companies are going to continue to exist is if they get extra money from taxpayers.
It's almost like if you really are concerned about the problem of monopolies, if you're really concerned about big corporations running things, then more government doesn't help.
Right.
Okay, so what about if we go to a different area? Let's talk about home loans. It's a great idea for everybody wants a house. Especially here in Hawaii, we see demand for housing is skyrocketing, and well, isn't it the government's job to give people subsidized loans so they can afford these houses?
Sure. It depends on which side of the fence you're on. If you're trying to sell a house, you want the government to give out the loan so that you'll get the most dollar amount for your house, right?
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is it pushes up house pricing all around. So chances are, if you're going to buy another house, it's going to be inflated too. So the loans don't really solve the problem of housing. They just make the cost more expensive.
And I guess we saw that result in the miraculous housing crash of 2007, 2008,
Right.
caused by some of this we were talking about. Well, very interesting stuff, and we'll learn more about what is a libertarian when we come back. You're watching A Hana Kako on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcasting Network. We'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii, and one of our delights is to be partnered with Think Tech Hawaii and produce programs every week. Every Monday at 2 o'clock, we have a show called E Hana Kako, which means let's work together. So we bring people from all across the nation and the country, and certainly throughout the islands, together here to talk with them about how to work together, and how to work together to do the following: to build a better economy, a better government, a better society. So if you're interested in the research of our think tank, the Grassroots Institute, or if you're interested in how that's applied at the governmental and community and business levels, you'll enjoy the fascinating conversations with our guests on E Hana Kako every week on Think Tech Hawaii at 2 o'clock on Mondays. Until our next show, I'll see you. Aloha.
Aloha, I'm Joe Kent, and you're watching E Hana Kako on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcasting Network. Today, we're talking about a new word that is in the mind of the public. They're thinking about it, they're wondering what it is, and we're helping them understand it, the word libertarian. Basically, it means someone who thinks there should be less government. Now, we're talking with a libertarian today, Matt Bowler, and he's helping educate us about what does less government mean, what is the vision. And, well, obviously, we've sort of knocked down the easy ones, the post office, you know, the military spending, the guns, and all these sort of easy things. But what about when we get down to the core of what is a government, you know, the role of government? So, in many people's minds, well, surely we need a police, surely we need a court system, surely we need, you know, the firefighters. What about these core government services? I mean, surely you don't want less government there.
Possibly. The reason I joined the Libertarian Party wasn't actually for the core services. Like I believe even if we had total free market system, there would probably still be courts. I mean, we need a way to resolve issues between people.
You're saying that courts would just emerge through a free. If there was a demand for courts, there would be it would be supplied by the market.
Right.
Okay, but you're saying the reason you joined was
is more for the bigger injustices, the Federal Reserve System, the propping up the wars, and the central bank system, large monopolies, and the constant waste of money. I mean, I don't know how true it is. A lot of the stuff you see on the internet is kind of hit and miss, but one of the things I read was the Pentagon lost $8 trillion, and that happened before 9/11, shortly before that. So that if they can lose $4 trillion there and another $8 trillion, why do we need them to mishandle our money that way?
okay. So you're almost talking a little bit about the banking system here now and the Federal Reserve System, which are also, a lot of people say, are core government things that we need the government to regulate the bank industry. Bernie Sanders and a lot of progressives say the problems in our society are caused by the big banks. So don't we need government to keep those big banks in check?
Well, the Federal Reserve System actually allows the banks to go unchecked because they can make very risky loans and risky bets on the market, and they do it with other people's money. And if they run out of other people's money, then the Federal Reserve gives them more. So the consequence of having the Federal Reserve is these huge bubbles that show up.
It's kind of like a rich kid with rich parents who spends money and always begs his parents for more, and
Right.
the parents say, okay, here you go. And so,
Right.
so then the banks behave differently than they would than if they actually had a potential to really go through financial losses, like real financial losses.
Right. And so what they're talking about now is kind of funny because during the last crash, what they did is they merged all the banks that were failing together with other banks. And that was to kind of hide some of the problems that existed. And now there's political calls to break up the banks and make them smaller again. I don't know how that's going to solve anything. You know, they were small before they had problems. You want to put them together, they still have problems. You break them apart, they still have problems. So the problem isn't how big the banks are. The problem is the root cause, and that's the Federal Reserve.
Okay, so but how do we get to the root of this problem? I mean, is it really just as simple as turning off the printing presses at the Federal Reserve, and then that would magically fix everything?
No, I think the solution, if you want one thing that could fix it, and that's freedom. Just let people trade with what they want and lower taxes and don't get involved so much. So if people could hold gold and trade gold without being taxed extra for swapping in and out of dollars, then that would make trade with other currencies a lot easier.
Oh, wait, you're saying that if I have a gold bar and I want to trade it for something on the market, let's say I want to buy a house with a gold bar or something, right now that's illegal, or it's hard to do, or how would that work?
Well, it's just hard to do because everybody's expecting cash because that's what is required to pay taxes with.
Oh, okay. So,
So
money
really-
is tied to taxes.
Right. So the IRS props up the dollar because they require taxes. And the IRS was created at the same time the Federal Reserve was for that reason.
Okay, but what about just if I wanted to start a different type of money? Let's say my own Joe money or something like that.
Right.
Is that illegal right today?
Only if you put dollar denominations on it, it would be.
Okay.
It would probably be pretty hard to pawn off on somebody if you
Yeah, why
didn't
would
do
anyone
that.
want that? Right, okay.
Right. And so there's a really good example of currencies that are emerging right now that kind of tackle that problem, and that's Bitcoin. And it doesn't have a dollar value on it. It just is what it is. And but the problem with it is if you buy a Bitcoin at $1 value and then you sell it at a higher one, then you have to pay taxes on it into that system.
Okay, hang on. I think you're talking a little past me right now, because I'm wondering first, what is Bitcoin? Is it some kind of coin that you can hold?
No, it's a electronic. It's kind of like email. It's not physical mail. It's digital electronic currency.
So we have mail, physical mail, we've got digital mail, we have physical money, and now we have a digital money. And how is that digital money different than, well, the digital money in my bank? You know, I've got a Visa card and there's some digital money there. So what's the difference?
One is regulated by the Federal Reserve and is basically unlimited because they can create more. And Bitcoin is not. There's only 21 million of them going to be created. And so that puts a limit on the system, so people can trust it more than they can the Federal Reserve notes.
Okay. Okay, well, going back to this question about the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve prints money, and they print it up in case there's some kind of financial crisis. Okay, we need more money, so then the government gets more money and it gets distributed through the economy. Some economists would say that that's a healthy thing to do because, hey, if there's a crisis, you need to, if there's a fire, you need to put it out with water. So what about that? I mean, if we just had a Bitcoin kind of currency that wasn't allowed to be printed, then maybe we would get into a financial crisis with that, and we wouldn't be able to be bailed out. So what about this problem about lack of bailouts?
But like I said, the solution to the current problem is freedom. So we should be able to use whatever we want to trade. So if you want to use Federal Reserve notes, you should be able to. And if you want to use Bitcoins or whatever else, you should be able to. So a lot of times, we make decisions to hedge against problems. So we shouldn't be locked into one set of ideologies as far as finance goes.
Are Bitcoins the only alternative to money, or are there other, Joe coin or something like that?
I think most libertarians would probably say gold and silver.
Oh, okay.
Is
Yeah.
probably one of the best.
Well, can't we use gold and silver right now? I mean, let's say I want to go to the store and buy a pack of gum. Can I just use some gold flakes or something to buy that?
Yeah, but what happens when they say, oh, you owe this much money for tax?
Oh, I see. So it's really the taxes that keep that whole thing in check, huh?
Right.
I see. But there are other currencies emerging along with Bitcoin. Is that right?
Other cryptocurrencies?
Yeah,
or?
yeah. Like Bitcoin and there's some other kind of Litecoin and
Yeah,
all
so
these
my
other things?
favorite is Monero, but there's all kinds of things going on, and some of them are based on the ability to do services. So one of them is going to basically make like the Web 2.0, and you're going to use their currency as the fuel to run programs on the different networks. So there's Ethereum and another one, I can't remember.
That's okay. Well, there's probably a lot of them emerging in this futurist market, but it'll be really interesting to see where that goes. Sort of closing the program today with the tough questions. If we talk about courts and police, okay, we took care of the money system, that's squared away. But when it comes to courts, I mean, don't we need a government courts to help us decide the different conflicts in our society?
I think we're always going to have courts, but I think it's possible to fund them privately. But as a matter of like the Libertarian Party, going towards less government is really the aim. When we get to the point where how we're going to fund courts is the biggest issue of the day, then I probably will not be interested in combating the current political establishment.
I see. That's kind of like a fun, philosophical or intellectual thing to talk about. Okay, should we have courts or not, or what? But at the end of the day, that is one of the last things that you might cut from the government.
Right.
And police?
The police, I would say, a lot of the problems that arise is because of bad laws. For example, drug laws. So if police are doing things like they're not going out and helping people if they're going after like drug crimes, which aren't really hurting anybody. So if we, first thing is to reorganize what are their priorities, and then we could save a lot of money. I think 90% of the money that goes towards police is towards fighting drug crimes, and they haven't won, and it's never going to happen. So reorganize their priorities.
And we might see better police, but we're already seeing, if you've been on social media, you see these videos, and not to say that all police do this, but obviously the ones that go viral are the videos where we see police, abusing. Just today I saw a video of a police officer with an abusive practice over a young girl. And so what about this, corruption, abuse, all these sort of negative things that are coming out of the police department that maybe don't have anything to do with the drug laws per se. Well, what about this when it comes to police? I mean, do we...
Right, but to me, a lot of it is about the bad laws that are written. There's too many laws in the books. It gives them too much power to go after people for any reason that they want. And so I think to get a better police force, you have to reduce the amount of laws that they enforce, and then they can get back to protecting and serving. Should be their main function.
So the more laws you have, the more police have power.
Right, and the more police that are needed to do frivolous things. I mean, just the amount of harassment that happens is just too much.
Okay. Well, in closing the show today, you mentioned you describe yourself as a libertarian. And do you have any final thoughts about what someone can do if they want to learn more about what is a libertarian?
Well, they can go to the Libertarian webpage, or actually, there's plenty of things on the internet, especially, what got me involved was many years ago with Ron Paul. I just now joined the Libertarian Party just because I cannot associate myself any longer with the Republicans. But I think, there's plenty of opportunity on the internet.
Just go on the internet and jump the millions of people who are trending this on Google and Twitter and elsewhere. And, join us next week. We're going to be here, same time, same channel. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks for being on the show, Matt Bowler. I'm Joe Kent, and you're watching E Hana Kako on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcasting Network. Aloha.